Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 25, Shortcuts, Hacks, and Secrets. Hey, everybody. It is another Friday afternoon, 2:30 p.m. in the Mountain Time Zone where I am. But wherever you are, I am happy to have you here for the Takeup. We have what's going to be, I think, a light and fun kind of episode today. It's not going to be quite as heavy, maybe not as technical as it usually is, but I think it's going to be a good one nonetheless. As you guys saw, and I'll go ahead and bring this back up because I think this is going to be the fun part and the watchword through the day, is the scare quotes I put up on the title card. If you haven't seen it, what do we have here? Shortcuts, hacks, and secrets, right? Shortcuts, hacks, and secrets. Why am I calling them that way? Why do I have scare quotes on everything? Because truth of the matter is, most of the time when I see people talk about shortcuts, hacks, and secrets for machine embroidery or for digitizing, a lot of them are not actually particularly useful. There are shortcuts, and then there's cutting corners. There are hacks, and then there's just being a hack or hacking away at something and not making it work out. And the other thing are secrets, where as we've talked many times, most of what we do in this industry and in most of apparel decoration, really, these things are not secrets, should not be secrets, and we should do our best to make sure they don't stay secrets. So honestly, shortcuts, hacks, and secrets, well, it's more about what we can do, what we should do to make things faster, make things better, what we shouldn't do, what really is a hack, because like we've seen everywhere, yeah, air quotes, man, life hacks, these hacks that people show, a lot of them are not really worth doing because they may cause other problems down the road. And secrets, like I said, there are things that we should do to make sure they're not secret. All the basic things we should know should not be secrets, but there are some real secrets that we can share. And this is the fun part, some confessions that I'll come up with about what we do in the commercial world, what we do when we're doing the kind of work that we have to do to get things out the door that maybe we don't always talk about or isn't necessarily the most advisable. So we're going to talk about a little bit of all that. Might be a bit of a short show. I'm really hoping to see more of you guys kind of jump in on the comments. I'm going to say hi to you guys in a minute. But if you have something you talk about that is either a shortcut or a shortcut, a hack or a hack, or a secret or a secret, I would like to know more about it in the comments. Come in, comment, tell me about the things that are your confessions for commercial embroidery. Talk about your best tips. We're going to share some other people's tips today too. And let's just discuss how things go down when it comes to shortcuts and hacks and secrets and how it is. So let's go ahead and say hi to some folks who are here first. Jeff, ready? I'm excited for this. I hope I have enough to give you today, Jeff. But today is it's going to be a little bit of a lighter day. Like I said, this is not as much of a heavy technical day. This should be a little bit of fun, and we can talk about some fun stuff today too. But I know you've got some good shortcuts and hacks too, so I'd be happy to have you share. Cindy King coming in from Texas. Good afternoon. I like the title. You know, I will say this, as YouTube titles go, I'm pretty glad that I threw the quotes on this sucker, because if you're joining via Facebook or YouTube, there's plenty of videos out there who are going to tell you that they've got the corner on the hacks and secrets that are going to get you done. And I'm going to tell you the truth is that most hacks and secrets, there's multiple ways to say skin this cat. I don't love that metaphor, but hey, that's how it is. There are multiple ways to do this thing. And most hacks and secrets are probably either commonly known, not that impressive, or may or may not help at all. Mike coming in, Mike Muldowney. Hola, amigos and amigas. Yes, hola. Happy to have you here, Mike. And he has something to share that we're going to talk about shortly. Frank from the UK, good evening. Happy to have you in, Frank. Justin, Digitizer himself, who went live this morning with some cool stuff. Hello, Erich. Looking forward to the shenanigans. Thanks for hitting me with Erich on the Takeup, man. I don't get enough of that from the Two Regular Guys. But yeah, if you don't know the Two Regular Guys podcast, that is the unofficial gloss for the way I spell my weird name is Erich, which Terry Combs likes to say is my rapper name, but you know, I don't have bars, guys. I can't spit. It's just not going to work out. All right. And as I brought up in the intro, Jeff Fuller, air quotes. Yes, we have air quotes on a lot of that stuff. And Ramona, the reason I laughed and lost my place in the middle of the run-up was absolutely Ramona said here, wait, you mean like using coffee filter stabilizers? Hey, Eric, good to see you. Good to see you here, Ramona, too. Also, she's been going live in the Embroidery Nerd group. We're going to talk about them again later. But yeah, no, coffee filter stabilizers. Let's go ahead and start right there. Let's start right there with the hacks. This is one of the hacks that drives me crazy. Stabilizer hacks, people using things that are not stabilizer for stabilizer. And here we go. Another one's going to make me laugh. Like I said, this is going to be a fun day today. Mike, coffee filters, not just for masks anymore. You know, absolutely. Coffee filters. Here's the problem. When we're talking about stabilizers, let's talk about this again. When I say stabilizer, I don't say backing. I really try not to. I learned backing when I came into the industry, but I don't call it backing as much as I can help. As long as I don't get into my common parlance, I try and say stabilizer. Why? What makes something stabilizer? The fact that it is dimensionally stable. What are we trying to do when we put something behind that embroidery? Generally, it's not just to cover the back for some reason. What we're trying to do is arrest stretch and keep it from shifting. And so when we pull it in any direction, we don't want it to be unstable. We don't want to have any stretch. That's dimensionally stable. Coffee filter won't hold up. Paper towels won't hold up. Now, here's the thing. Somebody has said to me, I've seen somebody run something with paper towels and it worked. I'm like, it may work. The thing is, it doesn't necessarily provide stability. And the chances are, if you could run it on wet paper towel or something, that you really didn't need that much stabilizer in the first place. When someone told me they did paper towels, the last time I saw it, now there was one person who did it on knit hats, admittedly. The thing is that stabilizing on knit hats, yes, you can then remove stabilizer. I can also use wash away stabilizer commercially and work the same way. The thing is, once I'm done with that knit hat stretches, if I have letters or any sort of separated items on that hat, once I stretch it on a human head, as long as I didn't stretch it out quite right the first time I did it, or if it goes on a larger head than I expected when I did the embroidery, all the elements will move apart and I'll tell you this, you'll see a bunch of straight letters, and because we're on a curved head, they'll start to tilt and go all wacky. You don't want to use no stabilizer at all unless you have something that can stand up on its own or that has some sort of other way of keeping dimensional stability once that stabilizer is gone. But yeah, that's the thing. Cindy says, I've never heard of using a coffee filter. It's usually in the home market. And I think what it is people look at something that looks like stabilizer. Stabilizer, as we know it, is generally a non-directional wet laid fiber product, right? Non-directional wet laid fiber product. What this means is it's laid wet. It's non-directional because all the fibers in the product are laid all different directions. The thing is, what else kind of looks like that? Well, dryer sheets kind of look like that. Coffee filters kind of look like that. And also people will use anything that is remotely like it. I've seen people use all manner of papers, newspapers, stuff like that. It's also the other one, cardboard in the back of the hat to run through the cardboard that comes with a hat. Please don't run through the cardboard, because here's the thing, even if it works, the chances are you probably could have run the hat without it if that's what's going on, or the truth of the matter is you're going to chew that cardboard up and have cardboard gunk and dust down in your bobbin case and all over your machine. I've seen someone do it. It turns into pulp, fiber, and gross mess on the machine. I'm going to go ahead and say hi to a couple other people who jumped in because I always like to call this out. Maureen, thank you for joining. Maureen, first video you're seeing, thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming in, Maureen. Thank you very much. And also, here's some other ones. Yeah, Nancy Johnson says weed barrier or ground cloth. That might be better than the others. At least it's a cloth that might not stretch. Tyvek envelopes. Tyvek envelope is pretty crispy. Now, I have done embroidery on a Tyvek envelope, but it makes a hole that is hard to deal with sometimes. And honestly, it does. I agree with Jeff on there. Nightmare to clean. Wait, you mean hats come with stabilizer? Yeah, the cardboard that comes in the hat is not stabilizer. Why? It's the same reason why tearaway doesn't work for everything too, guys. Once you start punching holes through something like a piece of cardboard, it's going to get perforated, it's going to tear apart, and it's not stable anymore. It's also why doing a super heavy design on a stretchy material on something like light tearaway stabilizer doesn't tend to work, because the more you chew it up, the more it tears apart. So when I talk about stabilizers, that's the first hack I'm going to tell you. You should probably use real stabilizer. So when we talk about that, we weren't going to go straight to hacks, but we went into it. So one of those hacks, one of the embroidery hacks I hear, yeah, use something else for stabilizer. Truth of the matter is, for the most part, I'm going to recommend that you use embroidery-specific materials. The real hack for embroidery-specific materials for me is to use the correct material for the right application. And somebody's going to tell me that's not a hack. I go, yeah, not really, but compared to what I see people doing, maybe it should be called a hack. The thing is, if you want to use less stabilizer and make it cheaper, number one, to make it cheaper, if you're not worried so much about your production time, use roll stabilizer instead of pre-cuts, and it makes it a little easier for you to handle, right? It makes it where you don't have to do the cutting of the stabilizer yourself, and then you can lay those things out. So the hack there for the cheapness is to check, and we talked about this last week with process and repeatability. How much time do I spend cutting stabilizer versus how much does it cost for the pre-cut? That's an equation you can get to. Also, if you're using the right stabilizer and your hoop's under the right tension, you shouldn't have to have 5-6 layers of this stuff like I see people doing. Most of my work is done on most likely one layer of medium cutaway stabilizer, or one layer, maybe one layer plus some other augmentation of a performance stabilizer on some performance wear. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a hack for me is just saying, hey, if I want to use less, use something that's going to maintain the dimensional stability it should, and that then I don't have to, use extra of. And I'm also not, let's say I've got tearaway layers. I'm not tearing away a layer and then cutting a layer and then working on the topping. Let's say I don't need topping. That's another one too. Here's another hack for you. If we want to talk about hacks, when you're on a high pile garment, if you use a knockdown stitch, which is something like Embroiderers does an automatic knockdown stitch, or you use like my stitch I usually like to use is a light mesh fill, which it's a light density fill at 45 degrees with another one at 135 to make a little mesh on top of the garment. So super dense knits that have really deep furrows in them, or faux fur or heavy toweling, something like that. When you use something like that and it's used correctly, you don't need to put solvay or any sort of water-soluble topping on that. Saves you an application step and you don't have to do it. That's my hack. My hack is that sometimes using appropriate underlay or global underlay or stitching to make something happen means you don't have to use materials or go to extra trouble to do it. So that's the kind of hacks I like too. So, that's what I'm talking about. And also, let's go ahead and run this too. Exactly. If you want to make it cheaper, Jeff is right on the money here. Don't skimp on stabilizer and end up ruining garments. Yeah, ruined garments is a lot more expensive than stabilizer. And here's another one. Rowan says, cling wrap topper. I know some people really love cling wrap topper, and I'm going to say that is a little rough. I know that there are blocking toppers that people use that work. My experience has been that if you use a plastic topper like this, after you heat this thing, you dry it, you wash it, especially we're talking about towels is often where you see the cling wrap topper being used. If it's something that you're going to launder, or especially launder heavily and frequently, eventually that stuff degrades. And what I've seen is on big runs of big satin stitch columns, the satin stitches start to come apart. The cling wrap topper has long since degraded, and the loops of the high pile material start to pop through. So that's another one of those hacks. People say put cling wrap or plastic on the top. Plastic doesn't really hold up to the laundry the way that other things might do. Use underlay instead. Use underlay stitching, because if you're using polyester stitching for your top stitching and polyester stitching for your underlay, well, they're both going to last about the same amount of time. Might as well knock it down with that. And we actually have, Maureen has asked for a suggestion. What would you use on dry fit type shirts, especially white garments? I usually use like a no-show mesh of some type, or an action bag, something like that. Mike here, I'm going to go ahead and share Mike's topic because, hey, why not? I can let you guys make the content today. Mike Muldowney says, I use Gunnold action back, 2 layers, one at a 45 to the top, works well and hides nicely. Jeff says, I like 2 layers of 1.5 ounce Weblon, 45 degrees. Yeah, man, really. I would say that for me, usually 1 layer to 2 layers of some sort of performance specific topping or backing usually works. And I just did it. Backing, you got me. Stabilizer. So I use a performance stabilizer. No-show mesh is what I started with, but there have since been other options. Now, if you decide to use a woven stabilizer, some people really love woven stabilizers for this kind of work, then you absolutely must have one at 45 degrees off from the other one, because woven stabilizers, you can imagine the weave. You have the warp and the weft, vertical and horizontal here. If you pull on one direction, you're pulling against these threads. You pull on this direction, you're pulling against the other threads. You pull on the 45, and all those little squares turn to diamonds. They stretch. So if you're using a woven action stabilizer, there are woven performance for stabilizers. Make sure you turn one at an angle, because you have to cover that angle of weakness in the weave. Otherwise, you're not going to get dimensional stability. So here's the test. Easy test for if something's going to be a good stabilizer. Does it stretch? Does it have dimensional stability? And yeah, there are, like I said, there are woven stabilizers. People keep bringing them up to me as we have classes recently, and those things have a tendency, like I said, they're going to, if you use one piece, you're going to have an angle in that. Generally, if it's, like I said, if it's straight up and down, you're going to have it on the 45s. It's going to be weak, and you're going to have to put a second layer and turn it so that you block that stretch in that angle. So that's what we're looking for. You want to know what makes it something stable? Check it, see if it stretches. So it's one of those things. So it looks like, I'm just going to say people are liking the action backing. Yeah, check it out. That's the best thing you can ever do, is test samples. Pretty frequently, distributors will give you samples. Back in the day when we had trade shows, you could get samples a little more easily, but I would go ahead and talk to your distributor. And here's the other thing, people. I know it seems like a lot of money to bring in samples and test. There is nothing like spoilage to turn you around on that, because one high-end garment ruined will cover your initial testing samples. I'm almost certain of it. I would definitely look for that. And honestly, the light no-show backings tend to not show through. Maureen asks again, does that show through? For me, I like I said, that's why I like the no-show mesh. It doesn't show through very much. And I'm still cutting pretty close. I'm going to tell you truthfully, I spend a little extra time in the finishing process, because what I consider, here's another hack for you. You want to talk about a hack or a shortcut or tip? The other hack is this. Finishing a garment is way more important than you think it is. So instead of worrying about everything up until the finishing point and then jamming everything in a box, or not cutting very carefully when you're getting rid of your cutaway stabilizers, spend more time on finishing, because that's your last chance for Q&A. Or QA, it's your last chance for quality assurance. It's your last chance to make sure you don't put something ugly in the box, and it's your last chance to have a nice impression. And I'm actually going to talk about this when we talk a little bit about the confessions, the secrets in this world, is that sometimes what we do for finishing isn't always the easiest stuff to do, and we sometimes have to do stuff that's not the best or might not be excellent if we had perfect embroidery from the first moment, but it is definitely worthwhile, folks. Definitely worthwhile to do. And I'm going to go ahead and jump on a couple more comments through here. So, Mike says, and about the show through, it depends on the ultimate sheerness of the garment, but I find action back hides better than others. Someone's looking close enough, hard to hide anything. And yes, like Erich says, cut it nice and close. Yeah, cut it nice and close and carefully. One of the other hacks to do is when you flip your garment inside out, go ahead and pull up your stabilizer and cut where you can see the bottom blade. Don't cut with the stabilizer over the garment so you can't see what you're doing. Make sure you can see the bottom blade of your scissor while you're cutting around the backing. That's one of the things you can do. That way you can manage your seam really carefully and cut around it. And also a nice sharp scissor. Yes, a good sharp scissor will cut you or cut a garment more easily, but it also goes through that stabilizer like butter and enables you to run through the back. And Mike says, I use my applique scissors to cut backing. Wow, that will give you use an applique scissor, like a duckbill scissor, ones that have a big flat cut on the back. That would allow you to cut real nice and close. And if you have the time to do that, absolutely, that's a cool idea. So thank you, Mike. One more shortcut, tip, trick, or hack. Mike says applique scissors for backing, and I'll say, yeah, not a bad idea necessarily. And Jeff says, come on, we're having fun today. Bonus time in the comments, calling it. Yeah, there's probably going to be some bonus time. We'll see. It depends on how this goes, since we're talking about all these comments, folks. So absolutely, it's one of those things to think about. Stabilizer, right? Stabilizer. But let's go ahead and talk again about the stuff we were going to talk about. We're going to talk shortcuts, cuts, and hacks and secrets. Well, shortcuts. Let's go back to the word shortcuts, and I'm going to say what kind of shortcuts actually work. And for me, the top shortcut you should know, let's say you are a digitizer, or even if you're doing some light editing or a little bit of stuff in software, the best shortcuts ever are real shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts. If you are digitizing and you are not heavily utilizing keyboard shortcuts to get around, to select tools, to move back and forth between things, I don't know what you're doing. You need to learn keyboard shortcuts. Get into your manual, find all your keyboard shortcuts, and learn them by heart, because it will speed you up immensely in digitizing. So there's a real shortcut. A real shortcut that's going to work for you if you're doing any kind of work in software is to learn all the keyboard shortcuts for your software. Don't run your mouse up into the corner, into the menus every 2 seconds when you're doing something. Learn the keyboard shortcuts so that the only movement you do with your, I'm going to say right hand if you're right hand dominant like I am, the only movement you're doing with your mouse hand is to do your actual drawing, and all of the other selection of tools, all the rest of what you're doing is done with your keyboard, and maybe every once in a while a clicking right click context menu drop out, not going back and forth. So keyboard shortcuts are absolutely where it's at. Whether you use a custom peripheral or not, if you're somebody who's using a drawing tablet like what I generally have here, I will go back and forth between shortcuts. Absolutely use keyboard shortcuts, learn them. If nothing else, if you're not copying and pasting anywhere you are, graphic software, embroidery software, wherever you're at, if you are not using the undo key, if you can't Control Z like your life depended on it, then I don't know what you're doing. But sincerely, when you're in digitizing software, generally there's a ton of keyboard shortcuts to help you, both to select tools and to move around the screen, move around the workspace, and to do things like zoom into a selected item, to replace one item with another, to select stitch types. All of this stuff is generally accessible by keyboard. And if you don't know the keyboard shortcuts, you're definitely wasting time and you're wasting effort. So absolutely something worthwhile to do. So keyboard shortcuts are big. The other kind of shortcuts I like in that same vein, folks, is to use nudging. if you are not nudging, that's also something you absolutely should know. And it's something where I think I'm going to go ahead and share a screen just to show you what I'm talking about. Whenever you are in vector graphic software, digitizing software, and some drawing software, depending on if it has any sort of selectable vector items, when you select nodes, you can usually use your arrow keys and some combination of modifier keys, whether Control or Alt or Shift, depending on how it's all set up, or you have it set up to nudge the points around by a defined amount. And why do I think that's important? Well, I'll go ahead and share software screen for just a moment to let you see this. If you were doing something like, let's say, manually compensating something. So we always talk about pull and push compensation. One of my hacks is that most of my pull and push compensation is going to be handled myself. The only time I'm going to jump into pull and push compensation menus is to give it that little bit of extra compensation and to adjust for compensation on different types of material and garments. That's one of the things I always talk about, is that my basic compensation and overlapping is going to be there. But here's the thing I'm going to say is when we're on these shortcuts, you can go ahead and grab, we have this open end here. We have an open end. We always know that the open end on any sort of satin stitch column, that is going to push. This edge here is going to pull. Over here, this open end of the column is going to push. Let's say that I want to get this thing compensated for push. Yes, I can use settings if your software does it. Stitch Artist has push compensation where I can actually tell it to back up. But let's say I'm not doing this in Stitch Artist. Let's say I'm trying to do this. Maybe even I'm prepping my vector art and I want to do pre-compensation. Some people do that. They will compensate their vector art before they digitize. I'm going to go ahead and this one I'm holding down Control to get micro nudges. I'm going to tap the up arrow key and I'm going to nudge it up and I can see about what I've got here. And the thing is, and I'll go ahead and go back to it. 4 nudges, what I know, because I know how my nudges are set up and I know what the distance those nudges are set to, 4 nudges on this piece is going to give me 2, 3, 4, about 1 density, about 0.2 millimeters. And because those nudges are set specifically to that distance, I know that 4 micro nudges with the control point held down or the control key held down is going to give me that 2 points, 0.2 mils that I want to get out of that, or I can get 0.4 mils about. So 4 nudges, actually that's 0.4 mils, but you know what I mean? I'm going to be using that 0.1 millimeter nudge to go ahead and do my measured nudging, my compensation. And it's really easy to do. Plus, what does that mean also? I'm moving only in one dimension. If I grab all those and drag them, I might drag them off course to one side or another. If I nudge, I'm only nudging in the one direction that I've used, and I end up not causing so much trouble. So now I can compensate for push or compensate for pull, and I can do it in a precise way. And I can do that without necessarily just relying on settings. The other thing is a lot of software doesn't have any sort of push compensation. So it means that you're just going to have to do that nudging yourself anyway. If you find that something's not working well and you know about how far you can go, that's another hack I'll tell you. Here's another hack or a shortcut. If you're looking at a garment and you can see a line that you wanted to hit or a border and you have 1, 2, 3 rows of stitching that are outside of a border you want to hit. Let's say you have like a straight stitch border around a satin stitch end, and that satin stitch end pops out 3 rows below it. Go ahead into your software and pop up 3 rows. Grab the end of that satin stitch, pull it up 3 rows. And even if it looks like it's way inside of that line, you know it's going to hit that line because that's how much distortion you had on your actual garment. So that's the hack there. But like I said, shortcut-wise, I really like nudging. I like using keyboard shortcuts. I think you can't get past it. If you want to get fast at digitizing, you want to get better at digitizing, most assuredly, I think it's the way to go. So that is a shortcut thing you need to do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump out once again because we're talking about all this stuff in the comments. We have some great stuff talking about this. And there's a hack, once again, hack from Jeff Fuller. And this is something that is I have done, but there are some issues with it, and I'll talk about it briefly. If I don't have variegated thread, I'll run a second thread through the thread path on the next needle over up until I get to the take-up lever, and combine the 2 threads, run them through the take-up lever, and through the same needle, I do bump the needle up to 9014. I have both done this and seen this done. What I am going to warn you about with this, and this is what Jeff says, it's a neat thing to try, but I wouldn't run production. It's cool to run 2 threads through a needle, but it's one of those things that's fun for art. It's fun for producing cool samples and making something fun. I probably wouldn't do it in production. In production, I would probably take 2 fills or 2 objects and offset them and try and do that instead, each on a needle, because honestly, you only have 1 thread break sensor on that needle. If one of the 2 threads breaks, suddenly it drops out and you don't have that there anymore. And you're running at half density with only one of the colors. So it's a cool hack. I like it as a hack. It's a fun hack. It's also like I have done manual couching. You know what couching is? Couching is taking some sort of fiber or object and sewing it down on top of your garment. Like let's say you have yarn and you sew it down with the needle. And if you don't have a couching option on your machine, you don't have an accessory, you can run a zigzag and hold and run with your fingers, with your precious little fingers. You can run yarn under it slowly as you run the machine and track things through, and you can couch something down manually. It's very much like doing the worst applique you've ever done. Yes, can you do it? Is it great for production? No. It's a hack and it's fun, but it's not always awesome for production. What I will say though is I have seen people tell me this hack that Jeff said, instead of using variegated thread, to go ahead and put those two through. But yeah, that's one of those things. Cording or couching like that, also super scary. I've also seen that, the 2 threads through 1 needle thing. Super fun. Do it in the home market. Do it for yourself. Do it for your own art. I wouldn't run production with it, not for money. I would much rather take 2 half density fills or satins and run them on top of each other and get my best look that I can get out of it if I have to do it for production. But it is a super fun hack. The thing is, somebody will jump out and tell you this awesome hack without reminding you that if the thread breaks on one of the two, that you're not gonna get a sensor tripped, and you're gonna end up where eventually you'll just be walking back to your machine and finding half of the design not run in a way that's really hard to replicate or fix. So yeah, so kind of a fun thing. And I'll say, Diane says, love the nudge. We'll have to watch again to learn that. Any software you have, absolutely, you want to go ahead and look for the nudge. There's going to be some sort of nudge. Honestly, most of it, you'll select a point or an object. That's the other thing too. You have an entire letter that's not quite lined up. You have something that doesn't quite line up where it's supposed to be. Grab the entire object in your selection mode and just try your arrow keys. Most of the time, your arrow key is going to be one level, one distance, and then you'll have some other, you can have a micro or a macro nudge. So you'll have either control or shift, and you'll hold one of them down. You'll get a tiny nudge. You'll hold another one down and get a massive nudge. Depends on your software, depends on what you're working on. It's something that's really classic over in the kind of vector graphics software side of things. You'll see the nudging being used constantly. I like to use nudging. And Aaron, thank you for this one. Since we're having fun today, nudge without a grudge. You made me say that with my own voice. Thank you, Aaron. That's hilarious. And as Jeff says, absolutely. Poor man's cording. Yeah, cording, once again, is couching down a cord or an object. You can cord without a cording setup. It is a really great way to get a needle through your finger if you don't know what you're doing. And honestly, it's something that, though I've done all of this stuff, and that's part of the confession. Have I done all of these weird production things? Absolutely. Have I even done them for jobs at times? Yes, very likely that too. Are they great ideas? Not really, right? But that's the thing. When you do that, you sit at the machine and watch it. Any of those kind of hacks, you have to. But here's the thing to say. If someone shows you a hack or a shortcut, and part of the hacker shortcut is, okay, get your hands in the sewing field and hold this thing down the entire time it runs. Go back to my last episode about production and process and realize that's probably not the best for profit, folks. But yeah, I do love the idea of the poor man's cording. Well, all right. So we were talking about shortcuts, and I went over the easy stuff, whereas keyboard shortcuts are great. Use keyboard shortcuts. And honestly, that's great for setting things up so that you are doing your fastest work possible. Because as you guys know, I kind of don't love auto digitizing. So I'm saying that's one of those things people like to call out for shortcuts is, hey, use auto digitizing on simple stuff. And what I'm going to say is this. Yes, there is some use for auto digitizing. And actually, since he's been on the comments here, Jeff Fuller did a live in the Embroidery Nerd group recently, and his shortcut that he used auto digitizing for was estimating stitch count. If you really have no great idea, or you haven't been doing this for very long, throwing auto digitizing a logo can sometimes get you kind of a nebulous closer stitch count than nothing. And I'll say my shortcut or hack for that was honestly, I would give people a range of stitch counts when I was estimating, and frequently, because I had a history of logos, by the time I was doing this for some time, I would pull up a similar logo and size it to the finished size that they wanted, or I would pull up something that was close to what they were looking for or had the same amount of satin or fill that was close to what they were looking for, and use keyboard text to type out the text that they wanted, and it would give me a fair idea of the stitch count. The real hack for that is communicate with your people and don't price so tightly on stitch count that there is no room to go. And I would say that's the thing. Better idea to price and to discuss things with people so that you don't have to be worried about, am I 500, 1,000, 2,000 off depending on the size of the garment, the piece that you're working on. But yeah, sincerely, that's one of the other things you can use. You can use automated tools for some things, and it can be helpful. What are the things I think are good automation? Number one, good keyboard fonts. If you have good fonts that are keyboard fonts, what I mean by keyboardable fonts is that you're not back in the old ugly days. We used to drag in individual letters, especially in the home market. They'd be dragging in individual letters and laying them out. Keyboard fonts means that you can type something out with them. Generally, in this day and age, we're also talking about a native font. So we're talking about an object-based font that's scalable. Those fonts, if they are well made, are useful for all sorts of things that aren't custom. Names, titles, anything that does not have to be in a very specific font that you can't match. Because what I'll say is, here's the other shortcut not to do with it. Keyboard fonts, great for titles, great for names, great for divisions, great for backs of jackets where you're throwing a name and a number down. Wonderful stuff. I use them all the time. However, don't replace fonts in logos with kind of close matches. Digitize it instead. And here's the other big hack. I have taught a million people how to find fonts. There is an entire video that we did where a lot of what we talked about was art assets. And I talked to people about the best way to find fonts, where I'm like, here's how you find a font. Here's how you prepare a garment. It's something that I said before, prepare a scan of something. You got to scan this kind of low resolution, get the contrast higher, make sure the letters are as clean as they can be. In your sample, make sure that the most unique letters that are there are the ones that you feed to what the font or what font is or whatever the font recognition engine is. I've taught you all that stuff before and talked about how to find a font, but the real shortcut is if you're a digitizer and the letters in front of you are the only letters you need, and there's not a ton of them. If you're looking at a company and the company's name is Hall, we now have looked like 4 letters, turns out to be 3. We got an H, an A, and an L. That is all we need to make. And if we are not changing the name to something else, and if we're not adding something else in that font to the text, digitize an H, an A, and an L. It is only 3 or 4 objects per, and I believe on this one, if it's 3 objects on the H, 3 objects on the A, 1 object on the L, unless you got serifs. There really isn't that much to draw. There's not that many points. Digitize small pieces of text, even names, unless you absolutely need to add more names, more stuff to it. Digitize it. It's often quicker than the horrible, lengthy search it will take you to get a true type font that you will then end up digitizing anyway, or to find an embroidery font, but is not all that great. So that's something to think about, guys. Think about the time you put into a hack or into a shortcut versus the thing you could have done if you had just started. That's the real shortcut. The real shortcut is to take the short path to the thing you knew you should have done in the first place. But let's just go ahead and say this real quickly. We talked about sewing things with your hands in the sewing field. That's one of my confessions is I still to this day will pull and trim things while things are running. It's not a great idea. I don't recommend you do it. It's something I learned way back in the day before any of the machines I had some sort of sensor to stop me from doing it. So it is hard for me to remember that. And people do absolutely throw their fingers through the needles. But here's the thing Jeff said. I've been there and sewn my finger to a hat. Now I use wooden chopsticks to hold items. If a needle hits it, it goes through the wood and not my finger. Absolutely. If you are doing sampling, and I've done this before, we're going to talk a minute about something else, about holding down materials. But if you're sampling and you just have to put one piece of applique or a piece of foam and you're throwing it on one piece that you're watching and you want to hold it down, use a chopstick or something, and that way you can let it get started and you don't have to worry about it. Truthfully, I'm going to use something that adheres it to the surface. I'll usually use a little piece of double stick tape. I know this is awful. Sometimes people are like, really? You leave tape inside of a hat? You're doing a patch and you're only running something around the outside edge or an applique around the outside edge. I've used a piece of double stick tape to hold it down and I don't see any problem with it, especially with caps. It's not going to get laundered. It's not going to get gummy or weird. Little tiny piece of double stick tape will work. And I used to love, there was a product that Enmart had out for a little while, and it was a strip of a water soluble or a water activated adhesive on a little strip of stabilizers. You could wipe it like a stamp on a wet sponge, stick it down and put it down and stick things down pretty permanently. But it was the same kind of materials we would use for stabilizer. It was like a wet and stick stabilizer. And that stuff was really fun. I used that for a little while, but that's something that I would often do. But yes, if you are going to stick your finger in there, try not to. Don't hold something down, hold it down with the chopstick. And everybody laughs. But yeah, and Mike laughs at LOL at the chopsticks. But Jeff says, you laugh, but it saved my fingers, and they aren't hard enough to break or reciprocate. So, yeah, absolutely. Wooden skewers is something for sure, though. But, yeah, I agree. Sometimes it looks funny. Better than getting your finger run through the machine. So, absolutely, yeah. Jerry says, didn't know embroidery could be so dangerous. I wish I had the link ready for you, but if you go look, a while back, Deco Network did a post that I helped them do that was a Halloween post. It was all horror stories, and it is filled to the brim with pictures with x-rays of fingers with needles through them. I have been there when it's happened to somebody. I have seen several of them myself, and absolutely, you think one of those commercial machines that you see running through a horse blanket, if you think it won't put a needle through the bone in your finger, you're wrong, because it will. It is not nice. There are people right now who are carrying around extra metal who weren't before they were embroiderers. That's for darn sure. But yeah, and here's another one. Jeff says this is great. Goodie Stick is a double stick tape that's made to be embroidered through. Use it all the time. Absolutely. And I will say, like I said, in a pinch, I've used standard off the shelf double stick. It's not something I would do. It's something I've done with a patch where I'm not running the embroidery through. I have done it, but yes, absolutely use that. And Cindy King says spray adhesive. Yeah. Light spray adhesive that is made for embroidery, not palette adhesive. If you're someone who screen prints, don't go get that horrible crud from the screen printing department and spray that anywhere near your machines, and be careful with where you're spraying it in your overspray. However, light adhesive, absolutely. I've used it many a time. And we were talking about performance wear before. One of my hacks is that if you're having trouble with your stabilizer, you don't have a sticky stabilizer, but you're having a garment that absolutely won't keep away from stretching, or won't stay in the hoop the way you want it to, take your performance stabilizer, very light coating of that spray adhesive that's made for embroidery to be embroidered through, and adhere it down before you start. Some people actually use a heat press. I usually just use a light spray adhesive on standard performance stabilizer. Put that in there before you hoop it, and then your fabric is arrested. That's also, however, why I use, if I don't want to do that, and if I can get the material to behave for just a minute, I will use a global underlay, an underlay that goes out to the edges underneath my logo, especially if I have a fully covered logo or one that has a lot of coverage in it. I'll use a global underlay to stitch the material down. Remember that this thing is a glorified sewing machine that you're seeing in the green screen behind me. It's still a glorified interlock sewing machine that will sew the material down. So use underlay to stitch the shifty material down before you run your top stitching, and now it is permanently married to the stabilizer. So that's always a good one, guys. So that's what I'll say. Anyway, that's another good hack that I like to talk about. Using adhesive, using something like that is fine. That's not a bad thing. But let's talk about this again, folks, real quick. Let's get back to what we said. We had shortcuts. We talked about shortcuts. We're talking a little bit about hacks. And here's another hack that I have just recently discussed. And I discussed it with Jeff Fuller recently. I sometimes go back and forth from different softwares to do different stuff, right? I will go back and forth into vector software and from vector to DST, from DST to vector. And that's something that I've done with a great frequency, truthfully. So I will actually sometimes use vector graphics software to produce objects or lines or items that I can't produce in my embroidery software, and then convert them by taking them and converting them into SVG or whatever vector that your software will pull in. And then I will bring that over into my software, import it, and then apply a manual stitch. Because when you do that, if you apply a manual stitch to a vector like that, every node becomes a stitch penetration point, and you can actually use it to create stitch types that might not work in another way. You can use programmatic stuff in vector software to do that. Also, you can take DST files. Now, I'm actually going to share this with you shortly. You can take a DST file and export it through a conversion software. I'm going to give you a link for this, where you can take that DST file and take all the coordinates of the stitches out into vector, and then you can use that to apply effects in vector software, or use that to make weird graphics or fun stuff. So you can both use vector software to make stitches for embroidery, and you can make we can make vector art, or you can make art out of your embroidery vector as well. And I actually have some files that I'm gonna bring up and show. But though I do like Jeff offering to show the files, maybe next time we might bring that up as a follow-up, because like I said, this one's supposed to be fun today. It's supposed to be light and easy. I thought I'd bring some stuff in, but I will show you what I'm talking about to some degree. First, we're going to go ahead and bring up my Chrome tab here so I can show you a little bit about what I meant. But let's go ahead and bring up our browser so I can give you guys a look at what we're dealing with here. And essentially, first thing you're going to see is actually a piece of art, but let me back up. First thing I'm going to do is give you the hint. This is actually the thing that is worth something probably to you. This this piece has an undocumented feature. It's an old piece of software, older piece of software called Uniconverter 2.0. The thing is, it doesn't tell you it can do this, but if you go and tell it to open any type of file and you say, open this DST file and save it to SVG, you will get your stitches. Each stitch will be a straight line with a node on either end in vector software. This is not an easy way to make art for print out of your embroidery. It's absolutely not. What it does let you to do is super fun stuff like take a piece of stitching that you want to work with and then apply something to that pathway. And I'll show you what I did with that quite some time ago, but it is still kind of fun. The top part of this is actually native vector. This is a vector piece of art that's in front of you. And it looks like it's a preview from embroidery, but it's actually not. What I did was on each stitch line, I actually created my own, and this was actually done in Adobe Illustrator, not that it couldn't be done in other software, but I created my own custom brush on the vector so that I could say all over this line, anywhere on this vector line, I want it to have this look. And I made this custom vector brush so that then every stitch looked like a kind of simulated stitch. But this is, instead of being a graphic that you would have from, you know, any sort of output from your software, this graphic is actually completely full vector. If I keep on zooming in on it, it will zoom in endlessly because this is actually a vector treatment, not a bitmap treatment. So when I did this, this was for the Threadwork mailing list, which is an awesome embroiderer mailing list that still exists to this day as a Google group, run by Jerry Lee Medeiros, who's often on the show. And if you don't see her from the show, you will see her in the Nerd embroidery group as well. And this is something that she worked with. I kind of worked with her design direction. I made this many, many years ago. But the cool thing was I used that converter that I showed you to take the DST file out and convert it to a vector and then bring it into Illustrator where I could do things like path manipulation, like I said, painting a stroke graphic that I made in vector that made it look like stitches, and then I flattened it all out so I had this absolute piece. So yeah, Jerry Medeiros runs this, and so she's somebody who you'll see around, but she runs that Threadwork group. If you see her around, she'll corroborate that I made this monstrosity. It's kind of cringy now compared to where it was many, many years ago. But the cool thing about it is that you can actually take that DST and get vector out of it. And like I said, the other way works too. You can make a vector object and realize that if you have straight lines between every node, those can be stitches. You bring them in to your software and you can actually then convert them to a manual stitch pattern. So worthwhile to think about that as a hack. I think that's an actual hack. That's something where it's something that you're not necessarily intended to do, but that provides a function. Whereas a lot of the times people talk about life hacks, or they talk about hacks, and what they're doing is they're giving you kind of minorly useful tips, often that cause potential loss of time and effort, especially when they're telling you about materials that don't really work. Though with that, I'm actually going to bring back in another kind of tip, shortcut, hack thing that is useful. And somebody else who is on the channel with us right now, Mike Muldowney, shared this in the Embroidery Nerd group, the aforementioned group. And this was his hack for keeping foam on a hat when you're first setting it up, 3D foam hat. And I'll admit, usually what I used to do is tape it on, little piece of masking tape on each side, tape it on. That was often what we would do. Sometimes, depending on who did the run, a little tiny bit of spray adhesive might be the way we use it. But his hack, right, and he's got tired of all the other ways of doing this stuff. His hack was to use a small bungee cord or a stretch cord, shock cord, and it has little hooks, and he's hooking on both sides of the hat frame, as you can see here, and using it to temporarily hold down the foam until the hat runs. So I just thought that was a cool thing. So Mike, thank you for letting me share that. That is something interesting that you can do. That's a hack that actually would work, right? Certainly what I'd say, be careful with anything on your machine, because if you stitch right through that thing, absolutely your machine will stitch through that cord if you don't have it in a place that's well away from the embroidery area. But as you can see, the way Mike's done it, it absolutely does work. It is out of the way, and it's no more in the way than all those old school braids on hat bands used to be. So if you're that far down into your hat, you're probably going to hit the frame more than you're going to hit the bungee cord. But I thought that was a cool thing too. Little stretch cords, that is actually a useful thing. And here's another hack using stretch cords that I've seen before. It's great if there are modern machines now that run big heavy bags like golf bags or luggage or stuff like that where you can't take the pocket off. where people will run things on the pockets and they can't get those things stabilized. There are now new machines that have these, essentially I've seen this thing, it's like a little scissor lift that goes up underneath the bag and holds it up. And when it runs, you can actually support the bottom of that thing so you don't have this big heavy thing hanging on your pantograph or on your tubular arms, stretching it. What I have seen someone do, this is no lie, once again, here's a fun hack. They had hooks on their ceiling, right? And they were running bungee cords down to that, down to their piece, and it was just long enough where it had a little spring to it. And it was holding it up at the level of the pantograph. Would I suggest that? Not necessarily, but it beats the heck out of holding it yourself. I would say best option on that, if you do a lot of luggage, if you do a lot of heavy pieces, number one, if you sell the luggage yourself, choose one that has a zip away panel. Tons of golf bags have a fully zip off panel on the front. There's a front pocket where it zips all the way out, and it is absolutely meant for you to take that thing off and decorate it. First, if you're selling those yourself, sell those. Number two, if you don't have to, don't stitch through the pocket. You can use embroidery to make patches. We've talked about making patches many times. Make a cool patch. And one of the coolest patches I ever did was I did this kind of monogram setup where I did it on a piece of leather. I did this lovely monogram on a piece of leather, and then I used a big bean stitch on the outside edge, inside of the edge of this leather patch, to look like a construction stitch. Like I had used big, thick thread to stitch this thing right down onto the hat frame, or right out down onto the golf bag, right? Did I? No, I used a heavy adhesive to hold it on. The thing is, I made that stitch line, of course, ahead of time so that it could look like a stitched on patch. Then I had the look that the customer wanted, but I didn't have to stitch through it. So number two, adhere a patch on it instead of actually using a machine right through that pocket. Number three, if you can afford it, you're doing that work all the time. Like I said, go back, get the actual equipment that works for your setup, get one of those lifts that holds up the garment, or get a machine that's set up to do that stuff. And that's one of the better ways to do it. So absolutely, that's a good hack to work on if you want to. So anyway, that's something you need to do. I would not suggest, like I said, this little idea is not a bad idea. Some of the things like hooking things up to your ceiling, not always the best. Be very careful with your machine and make sure you're not going to do something that's going to cause undue stress on your equipment. So like I said, once again, these are the hacks that I showed you that I think are actually hack worthy. Go grab Unit Converter. It's fun. You can take things in and out of your vector software from your embroidery software to make cool vector stuff and vice versa. And it's fun for art. And I'm going to give you one other hack too. What I'm very blessed with is that, and I'm actually going to show you this stuff too, folks. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time, because I'm going to show you something in Embrilliance that I really love, because we have something that I don't have to hack and I used to have to hack. If you have software that doesn't have a good high definition output so you can make something, you can make, say, digital prints or something else like that out of the work you're working on, right? A lot of people want to output their embroidery as a high definition of some kind, some sort of high resolution bitmap. Like I said, we actually have in our utilities, we have luckily a save image file that will, you probably can't see this. I'm gonna go ahead and make this a little bigger so you can have a shot at it. I can actually set my resolution, and I can set an incredibly high resolution. I can get a transparent PNG right out of it. This was not always the case, right? When I was first doing this, they didn't actually have it. When I first was digitizing, this was previous to their existing high-res bitmap output. And back in the day, what I used to do is use a PDF printer. There are several PDF printers, both free and otherwise, that will allow you to set resolution. And you would be surprised that the 3D print on some software, if it doesn't have this export, will allow you to print a high resolution graphic. And when you set the resolution high on your PDF printer, when you pull it out of there, the PDF you get often has a fairly high resolution graphic. It is not transparent, and it is not often all set up correctly so you can pull one graphic out of it. It just allows you to export in an easier way. Is it as easy as buying a module that lets you do it? Or if you're lucky like I am, you've got Embrilliance, and Embrilliance has it baked into all levels. No. In your digitizing software, way better place. In your embroidery software to export a graphic at a high resolution. That is the best way to handle that. However, if you are stuck with software that you can't get a high resolution output from, or let's say you've got viewer software only that doesn't do it, and you just need to get something fairly high resolution for a good mock-up, or you just need to get that out so you can print something out that looks nice, think about using a PDF printer. If you need to put it on your website and you can't get a good graphic out of it, PDF printer set to a really high resolution, then you can import that into graphic software and you can get yourself something back. Once again, that's a hack. The thing about hacks is they usually take more time and give you a somewhat lesser version of the thing that you might want. So it's, like I said, is it a hack? Yes. Does it work? Yes, it actually works. But for me, my money, always, I'm going to look for software that's going to have the functionality I really need. So it's certainly a good thing there. And by the way, I want to bring up a couple comments that are funny here. My lift is called Cindy's Arms from Cindy King. Yeah, people do that a lot when you're holding up bags. You're just holding up bags with your hands while you're waiting for something to run. Not ideal for your productivity, Cindy, but something that you sometimes have to do. And actually, since we're sharing hacks, I love that people are talking about this stuff. This is great. Mike has we're sharing a bunch of cap hacks. And like I said, if you haven't gone back, go back and watch the other 2 videos I did on caps. There's some great stuff about cap design and cap running in those pieces. But I'll go ahead and share a couple of these cool hacks we have. Mike says, speaking of hats and hoops, I have a tape line on my machine that correlates to the closest I can run to the brim. Then in the software, I changed my start point to the middle bottom, has made placement on hats so much easier. You know what? Using custom start points or setting your start point where it needs to be, absolutely worthwhile. Even if you have software that doesn't do that, the other thing to always think about, you can print out. Generally, when you print out from your software and you have a graphic that has a centering mark on it, usually it's at 100%. Cut that out, lay it physically on the garment, and then set your center point to that printout. I'm sure most of you already do that if you don't have it set up in any other way. The way that Mike is talking about is much faster. If you have your marks marked on the piece where you know exactly where you can go, how deep you can go, that is awesome. But great idea, good way to handle that. Know where you're doing your placement for sure. Jeff says, one thing I do when I'm trying to make sure I have the hat hoop square, I put it on the machine, line the design up with the center seam, then run it down to my placement. If the press foot stays on the seam, the hat's square. Move to one side is crooked. I need to pull it off and rehoop. Very valuable when I was learning to hoop. Yeah, you know what? And here's one other hack that I've seen too. A lot of people, when you're doing 270-degree hat frames and you're trying to hoop your hat, what they'll do is they'll absolutely dead center line up their seam with the dead center of the hoop before they go, and then they'll tighten up their clamp. They'll go ahead and clip down the clamp so that the straps tighten up, and what they'll find is as you do it, it moves a little off to one side because you're not fully under tension, and when you tension up that clip, that it moves a little off to one side. If you know that it's always doing that, start just off center to the other direction before you hit your clamp, and then you're more likely to be dead on center with your hat if you're trying to get it dead centered, especially if you're doing like a large wide format thing. On all 3 kind of zones we usually do from side to side, or a really wide format piece. Some people like to do that. So that's something I'd like to just throw in there. If you're having trouble kind of keeping centered to the frame, you can do it that way. Truthfully, if you're running most things, you can go ahead and just set your center point once you get started. Who cares? But if you're doing a big wide format, then we really need a lot of that area. That may help you to keep things centered when you're putting that clip down. So there we go, folks. There's that. So now that we're here, we're almost to the end of the show. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the last thing I want to discuss, and that was secrets, right? Everybody talks about secrets. First thing I'd like to say, this is something that the owner of Embroiderers, who's here, you know, I'm at Embroiderers in the Embroiderers Studios, owner and CEO and head inventor of everything that we do over here, Brian Bailey, always says is there are no secrets and that these things shouldn't be secrets. And I have to agree, folks. Secrets, there are no secrets to the basics of embroidery. These are things that are physical, that are known. Densities, the way that we digitize most things, drawing objects, these are known quantities. Yes, they may not be known to everyone, but absolutely these things, these secrets shouldn't be secret. These are things we should all know. The things that go beyond the initial ability to stitch out a successful garment and to digitize something in a way that runs really reasonably, that's what we should have that goes beyond. And even those things shouldn't be secrets. What should make us different from each other would be our creativity, our commitment to serving our customers, our ability to come up with solutions that help them, our consultation, things like that. So that's the thing. Secrets don't really exist. When someone tells you they have the secrets to embroidery, all it means is they have either learned from someone else already these secrets, and they're going to sell them back to you, or that they have done the practice and the trial and error it takes to learn these things. The thing is, most of the things we think of as secrets, pull compensation, pathing, the way we handle a cap, the way we handle a certain kind of material, a high pile material, these things are something that you would discover if you embroidered enough. And actually, here's Jeff Fuller. He's got the secret. Absolutely. Biggest secret, practice, practice, practice. Get out there, practice, waste some material, waste some garments. If you think about it in your head and say you agree to waste it, it's never a waste in the first place. If you learn something, it's not a waste. You're going to destroy garments. I have destroyed garments within arm's reach of me right now, because even to this day, I will destroy something in the pursuit of trying to learn something new. Get out there and practice. The best thing you can do is practice. And everything I learned for the longest time, I did not have classes. I did not have instruction. And I was doing full-time digitizing for large multinational clients back in the day. We were doing huge stuff that was going into department stores. And I was doing commercial digitizing 3 months in because I sat at that machine and watched everything run. I analyzed those files and measured densities and measured overlaps and measured pull compensation and looked at the distortion between the garment and the file that I was looking at. And I watched the sequence in which they ran. And I watched and measured and I ran garments and I destroyed material. I wasted a lot of stuff and I spent a lot of sleepless nights at it. Would I suggest you do as much work as I did back in the day? No, I was young and I had nothing better to do but to get obsessed. Now, admittedly, I'm fairly obsessive with it now too, but I practiced. And honestly, the secret to the whole thing was observation, testing, and repetition. Look at what's going on. Observe and measure. Analyze designs. Watch them run. And record it. Write things down. Think about what it is. Ruminate on it when you need to. Think about how it works and write it down. Write down what happens. Look at what things affect the outcome. Try different materials. Try different stabilizers. See what they do. That's what you can do to get a real, like I said, you've heard me talk about this before. It's something the Icelanders say. I spent some time in Iceland. I loved it. Understanding something below your lower jaw. Not just in your head where it's, you know what it is. You read about it. You've heard about it. I taught you about it. Below your lower jaw, with your hands, with your body, in your bones, you know how something runs if you try it, if you test it. So get out there and test combinations and learn that stuff. And actually, Mike puts this together so much. Yes, you can only learn to make good embroidery by making bad embroidery. And here's the thing. You might strike it the first time out. You might strike gold immediately. I've had times where I try something brand new and it's crazy and I don't think it's going to work and it works. And it's shocking. Yep, might happen. So you don't necessarily have to fail. But the thing is, if you aren't failing, you're not pushing beyond your existing skills far enough. You're not trying things out there enough, probably, if you're not failing once in a while. And you're not going to invent anything new if you're only doing standardized embroidery. Here's the thing. One of the other horrible things about these secrets, if we teach you these secrets, if I teach you the numbers, if I teach you what stabilizer, if I say this is how much pull compensation to use roughly on this garment, I can teach you that secret. And it's something I've learned and it worked for me. But now I've standardized you on some settings and you might not reach beyond that and say, you know what? Yeah, Erich does this, but what do I do? And what if I have a better way or a different way? You might have a better way. And I'd love you to teach me so I can teach it too. But yeah, the secrets also standardize you. Commercial embroidery does live on standards because we need standards to be productive and profitable. We need to have what I always like to call known good settings. Known good settings will work. They are safe. Known good small text. Why do I always tell people small text, the smallest you want to go on your smallest letter is 5 millimeters. Why? Because with a 7511 needle with 40 weight thread, you will be able to run most lettering at 5 millimeters very easily because the smallest safe width for a satin stitch is about 1 millimeter. The smallest safe width for a gap is about 1 millimeter. A stack of 5 gives you your lowercase e, uppercase e. That's why I say that. Can you run smaller? Absolutely. Once again, sitting on my desk, I have 40 weight thread lettering, and this lettering is legible and runs, and it's 3 millimeters tall. Can you do it? Yes, under certain circumstances. If I had trusted that 5 millimeters was the only way and not just the safe way, I would never have tried that. So there's reason to try it. The thing I will say, though, this was too finicky and took way too much work. And honestly, if I looked at it again these days, this is a really, really old sample, incredibly old, older probably than some of the people who have taught embroidery. Seriously, I would do it in 60 weight thread and I wouldn't fight it so hard. But back in the day when we were standardized on 40 weight, we weren't changing needles all the time. I had to learn how to get it to work, and I got it to work. And you can push it, but I had very specific things I did. Only using a tall, narrow, compressed font, only using uppercase letters, only using block, changing the font from the font that existed in the piece to a font that would work for what I needed to do with the shapes. How did I learn that though? Testing. And I did get beyond the standards. The thing is, the standards get me there. You have to get to where you can make a result and then you can stretch. But the way you stretch is by practicing. And the way you get past the secrets is realizing that these are not secrets. These are standards that help us get through. Someone can teach you these things. And the thing that they give you, which is great, is they give you their shoulders to stand on so that when you need to make a design work, you make a design work. When you need to hoop something, you know how. When you need to get the stabilizer on there and you need to make sure it works and everything stays at registration, you can. But now that you've done that, when you take your time every week, which you should, to play and learn, then you get out there and you test something new, knowing what your basis is. Because I've told you in the course of this hour, what is stabilizer for? It's to keep something dimensionally stable. I told you why I use the stabilizer I use. But when I started out, we had cutaway and tearaway, medium cut and tearaway. That's it. There were no other stabilizers that we were using commercially. If I stayed in that mentality now, I wouldn't have water soluble for doing stuff where I can eliminate the stabilizer. I wouldn't have action backs or the no-show mesh. I wouldn't use we didn't also use topping back in the day. This was pre-Solvay. This is pre-water soluble toppings as well. There are all of these things that I wouldn't have used in the execution side, and definitely in digitizing. I did tons of stuff nobody told me to do, and I worked on things that people said probably wouldn't work. Now, admittedly, what you eventually learn is that some of this stuff that these secrets advise you against, the reason why they tell you it doesn't work isn't necessarily that it won't work, but that it's not profitable and it doesn't scale. And some of those things are true. I've taught people how to blend manually. Blending stitch by stitch these days, unless you get a client who's going to really pay for it, boy, that's a lot to swallow for digitizing. It takes a lot, and it is expensive time-wise. But somebody early on told me it couldn't be done. You can make any embroidery you've seen that comes out of a machine with one tool, with a manual stitch tool if you want to. It just takes an immense amount of time. So here's the thing, guys. I'm going to bring up one more thing. We're going into bonus time. So, Jeff, you won the bet. We are definitely in bonus time because what I wanted to bring up with this secrets thing is one more little sharing fun thing that I did. And this is to give you a couple of fun things that were kind of my confessionals. Back in the day when I was talking to a lot of people who are in the home market, they asked me, what is it really like to be a commercial embroiderer, and what are the things that people don't talk about? And I did this piece for Mr. X Stitch many, many years ago, as I recall. And I'll go ahead and throw this out into the comments because it's fun. And this is something that I did. Confessions from commercial embroidery, and some of this we've already talked about. But here's one of the things. I showed this picture, and immediately I said, yeah, hey, what's that marker doing in there, right? We all know there's certain things we do that we don't want to talk about. One of them is, back in the day, I knew so many people who lied and said that they had never touched up a garment that had a little piece of bobbin sticking up with an indelible marker. If you have not used a permanent marker to make a little dot on a black outline because there's a bobbin coming up from it, so you save an entire garment, I don't know you in embroidery. There's two kinds of people in embroidery. I always say that. People who have used a marker to touch something up and people who are lying about it. It's not, there may be somebody who hasn't done it. I'm going to say that may be the case. But when I first started, that was actually something controversial to admit and to say, yeah, you've touched something up before. The truth of the matter is, when you have something that's stable and that's washable, touching something up with a marker is not the end of the world. And I saw just the other day that Madeira was offering a pack of a multitude of colors of indelible markers that they were offering openly as an embroidery tool. Well, what are they a tool for? When you get a little piece of bobbin that sticks up, or something happens to your bobbin path and you have a loop and you pull it through and there's still some white showing and you touch it up. Honestly, what did we also call this? When we had clients who were incredibly picky about trimming, and this is something I'm not happy to admit, but hey, we're talking secrets now. This is the real deal. Talking secrets. We sometimes had a client who was really unhappy about trims, but then also did not like the fact that you would have any sort of evidence of the trims. And we had on dark garments, I remember very distinctly that we offered them liquid trimming. Between the letters, we dotted each of the trims with a very small bit of indelible ink, and it was faster than trimming it, and it looked better, and we went ahead and ran with it. The thing about this thing is this client had a logo that had a pattern of halftone dots. And they swore up and down that they could see the connecting trims between them. Really, you couldn't do it very much. You couldn't see them very much at the handshake distance, or now at double that distance of the social distance. You definitely couldn't have seen it. But this very picky client did not want to be able to see between those dots any sort of connectors, and trimming between them was not an option if it was going to be profitable. And we did some liquid trimming and used indelible markers to trim those garments. It's something I wouldn't do ever again on an entire logo like that. But have I done it? Oh, yeah. I've done some liquid trimming back in the day. And definitely I've touched up a garment. If somebody brings you a garment that by the time your effort is in it and you've brought this expensive garment to bear and this thing is now worth $30 out the door wholesale, killing it over one little stitch, that's not quality. That's madness. And that's wasting the garment. I wouldn't do it unless there was an absolutely great reason. You have one little dot of white bobbin thread, hit it with the indelible marker, folks. It's not going to kill it. And so that's what I talked about, the marked. That was the joke there. Now, here's the other one. Once again, it's something that I don't want to admit because I don't want to suggest this is how you do everything, but this is one of those confessions. This is the truth. Why is there a lighter in my embroidery kit? Because that's the other thing that I have done on occasion. I have had to follow a trimmer who was aggressive with how they were trimming, but not very accurate. If you've ever been with trimmers who are aggressive but not accurate, they trim and trim and trim and trim, and they leave little furry bits behind, and they don't look very good. And on garments that were safe to do so, that were not going to catch a flame immediately, I would occasionally use a lighter to do what I called fire polishing. So what do we have here? Yeah, fire polishing. This is something I wouldn't do these days, but I remember back in the day having a picky client who noticed these little fringes and got upset, and I had a massive order ready to go. And how did I get that to smooth out? Well, polyester thread and a very light amount of heat on the front, and yeah, that was enough to shrink those right up. Is it something I would do again or do it all the time? Absolutely not. Because really, what's the best option is to make sure your machine is in good order and that your trimmers know what they're doing. And honestly, here's the other thing. If you have trimmers and their vision is poor and they can't see the trims, sometimes you need to have different trimmers. If you've got somebody who's doing your finishing work and they can't see that the trims are being missed and they can't see that it's leaving big fringes, you need to talk to them and see if there's something else they can do in your company, or if there's someone else who's got a little more visual acuity. And this is from someone who has had some eye problems in his day. So I'm definitely, I could be shooting myself in the foot in another 10 years. But at the same time, if you can't see the trims and you have that going on, last ditch effort, have I used a little fire to polish something up? Yes, I absolutely have. It smooths everything up and it looks very nice and tight. However, if you are bloody minded enough to go ahead and run fire over a garment, no. On a light colored garment, on something that is made of something like acrylic or polyester that melts, you can cause horrific damage. So what am I going to ask you to do? Don't fire polish stuff. But, back in the day, running on a bunch of, heavy caps that were running well and we had a few little fringies, yeah, used to hit it with a lighter sometimes. But that's one of those things that's a real secret. These are the secrets we don't talk about. So what should we do instead? Trim carefully with a sharp trimmer if you're doing it manually. The other thing I like to tell people is stick your end of your trimmer up, slide it over till it engages really tightly to one side, trim that side, and then get right up against that flat and keep that blade really nice, parallel to the surface of the garment, and trim the other side. 2 cuts real fast. And I'll say this, Frank is also true on this one. Heat gun will also work. Heat gun is a lot safer. But back in the day, in my little in the shop we were in, it was a lot cheaper for everybody to run lighters, and that's what they did. And I'm going to say that it is not something I suggest you do. And the same thing is true of the heat gun. We all talk about this with 3D foam. 3D foam shrinks up, and if you have little fibers of 3D foam sticking out, one of the best ways to handle that, honestly, heat gun. Apply a little bit of heat, and it shrinks up the small fibers of 3D foam that are around the edges. It's not going to do the ones that are large enough that you have to poke them in. But here's the thing. 2 things to know about when you're finishing 3D foam. Yes, you can use a heat gun. If you turn it up too high, a heat gun, especially if it's a commercial heat gun, like one that people use to strip paint, you can scorch a garment with a heat gun. Be careful with that. Other thing is, I've known people who try and use dryers from screen printing. Sometimes a dryer from screen printing is going to be too hot, or the crown of the hat's going to stick up too high, will also scorch. So be really careful doing that. I suggest using an adjustable heat gun and only use as much heat as it takes to shrink up the foam. Do not just throw the thing on full blast, or use a non-adjustable one that runs really hot, because you can scorch garments or leave a haze of color, a scorch on a white garment especially. I've found it many a time. So be careful with that. The other thing is, With 3D foam, we all know that occasionally, even if you're digitized perfectly, even if everything's working exactly how you want it to, you will have a little tiny node of foam or a little tiny piece that sticks out occasionally. And if it's only happening occasionally, you can poke that back in. What I'm going to beg you to do is don't use your trimmers to do it. We talked about bamboo skewers earlier, or you can use, say, like a knitting needle. Knitting needle is fantastic for that. If you absolutely only have a few little pieces that you have to poke back in, grab a knitting needle. It's something that's smooth, that's meant not to hang up on anything, and has a nice sharp point. Poke the little piece of foam back in. It's no big deal. What's the right answer to that? The non-hack answer to that? The non-hack answer is to look at your digitizing and add underlay that cuts, or to look to make sure that your density on one side or the other of your column, or that the junction between them doesn't have a gap that's letting the foam poke out easily. The best answer to that is to use digitizing to cut the foam in a better way, or to make sure you don't have any gaps or density issues in your foam design. Second best answer, if you have to poke a little piece of foam in, poke it in with a smooth knitting needle, and don't use the blade of your trimmer, because yes, you can do it if you're careful, but how is the best way to cut and unravel a satin stitch? It's by sticking a trimmer through it. A nice sharp trimmer will do a great job of making that letter come all apart. Though I love this. We're talking about confessions. Jeff says, raise his hand. My name is Jeff, and I melted a hat. And I'll go ahead and say, my name is Eric. I have also scorched a hat terribly. I have melted one in pursuit of getting the 3D foam looking correctly. And I let one of my screen printers run it through the dryer and absolutely caught one on fire. So yeah, sometimes you fail, but failure is not fatal. Though success doesn't last forever either. So you got to keep trying. Anyway, folks, that's one of the other ones, into the fire. That's what I'll say there. And here's the last confession, folks. You're seeing a picture of my stock designs here. So since I sell them, I certainly can't say to you that stock designs are evil. This is the deal. I was an in-house digitizer for many years. I digitized just about everything. I can count the times I used stock designs probably on both hands. However, there are really good reasons why you might want to use stock designs sometimes. And I have certainly been brought stock designs that were against my will. Number one, when do you not use stock designs? Don't use stock designs to replicate elements that are close matches in logos. Logos, logo types, branding, stuff that has been designed specifically for a company, definitely don't use a stock design to replace a piece of it that's a close kind of match. Same thing with the stock fonts. Don't do that. Great time to use stock designs when you have a client that doesn't have a necessary image but just has an idea of what they want, and it's not for their business logo. It's just an item they want on the garment. My biggest client for this was outdoors people. I digitized so many bugling elk heads. I finally stopped and said to one of the customers, I said, okay, I made that elk head from the photograph you gave me. I did this stock, this. And he's like, you know what? Now that I look at it, can I get one that's turned in their head a little bit to like this? I think I should have it turned like this. And I'm like, so this isn't like one that you got? No, they brought me a Google image and I went and digitized this photograph. And I decided eventually that I would never digitize another random bugling elk head again. When I had outdoors people who didn't really care, they were just bringing me images of what they thought they liked, I would stop and show them a bunch of stock designs, and I would get them a nice stock design and spend my time making the stock design work well for what they needed to work on, and putting nice text around it that sometimes was custom or was just well appointed, well designed. So I ended up putting together a good package of garments that looked nice with a nice layout instead of digitizing yet another bugling elk. So honestly, stock designs, they usually aren't that great. They're usually not very efficient. But once in a while, if you have a one-off customer, if you're running a gift style shop, digitizing that stuff custom can take longer, cost more, be more frustrating. You can get on to doing something else. The other thing I'm going to say is when I would bring stock designs in, they would frequently come in with tons of color shading. And here's the other confession part of this. If the shading was 15 stitches here or there and it didn't add much to the look of the garment and I had full coverage underneath the shading, I would just rip it out. There were times that I would just rip it out of the design real quick and toss it because it didn't bother the customer in the slightest. What they wanted was a bugling elk head. They didn't want the slight flush of gold in one side of the neck from the bugling elk head. That was designed for a craft market where they were really looking to use the threads and make something super beautiful. When I'm just trying to put a bugling elk head on the left chest of a design and it has to have somebody's hunting company name under it and they don't care and they don't even care about the font, that is not the time to get too precious about it. But I will agree with this one. Exactly what Mike said. Mike, you're corroborating my point, so thank you for the social proof, my friend. Stock designs are frustratingly inefficient, absolutely, but for one-off baby blanket market, great stuff. Baby blanket market, outdoors folks who are just putting something together, sports sometimes, you want a baseball or a volleyball. Yes, I've made them, so I use my own, but I can imagine just using a random one. What does it matter at that point? When it's something that somebody wants that's very simple, that isn't specific, using a stock design can help, especially, like I said, one-off where you're just going to drop lettering underneath it. No problem using a stock design. Doesn't hurt anything at all. So that's my other confession. Have I used stock? Absolutely. Have I picked some stitches? Earlier on, we had something else here that was awesome. We had a comment, and now I can't find the comment. I'll have to see. This is one that I didn't talk. Here it is. Nora said, pulling stitches gives you a lot of inspiration. This is something I've said a million times. And yes, have I yanked stitches out of garments? Absolutely. I have yanked stitches out of garments constantly. Have I saved a garment that had a partially messed up run or had a small hole in it and run it anyway? Absolutely, because there's no reason to waste a garment over a small hole if the design is going to stitch together over the small hole and with stabilizer underneath it and stitches on top. You're not going to have a problem with the small hole. I'm not going to try and cover up a massive cut in a garment unless I am desperately being asked to by a client. I'm not going to try and cut up something or use something that I ruined and cut up, but yes, I will cover a small hole. Yes, I will make do and make something work. And I will say Nora is absolutely right about this. Pulling stitches is a great inspiration. And the thing I talk about with practice is, yes, everybody says there's going to be failure, there's going to be hardship, and it's tough. And I tell people to get past it. But the truth of the matter is sometimes there is just nothing that's like your own pain of watching a design run poorly, of watching a design run inefficiently to teach you exactly what you should have done. Now, I'll admit I am a bit of a perfectionist, so I watch things and I feel a little more ashamed than maybe I should. So I'm also giving you guys the permission. I'm saying, put it on me. I already feel bad. But the truth of the matter is pulling stitches, running something and having issues go wrong, sometimes that is the best thing you can do. That failure will teach you. That extra time spent on the machine will teach you. That fixing the problem will teach you better than anything I can teach you, because there is nothing like one-on-one experience. And also watching a machine run and seeing the interaction between stitches, stabilizer, design, pathing, sequence, tension, thread, watching it happen in real time, seeing how distortion works as something runs on the machine. There is nothing like it to teach you how fabric behaves, how machines run, how tension operates and what it changes. There's nothing like operating a machine. And I've said this a million times. If you come from the design world and you've never operated a machine, you want to be a digitizer, go operate a machine. Run a machine, run someone else's designs, best thing you can do. And Jeff again with the confessional times two. My name is Jeff and I have cut stitches. And I'll say this. Okay, Frank, I'll give you this to Frank. Here's the thing. I just told you guys, like I said, don't take everything I said entirely as truth. Customer wanted Apple Chancery. I gave him standard Chancery. He was happy. Absolutely. If you have a customer who's not looking for custom work or is not super worried about it, they have a font that they want, especially if it's a name, it's a title, it's something else, and you show them another font and they're good with it, it's between you and the customer. What I'm going to say is this. There are tons of digitizers I've known who will, without asking, replace the text in a logo type. Let's say that this logo type has some sort of compressed version of Helvetica, and then they replace it with Arial, or they replace it with Impact or something random. They use just another block font that's similar, but the leg of the R is wrong. The spur on the G is either there or not there. A customer will pick up on that, and it makes your logo look like a cheap knockoff of your real logo. That's where it doesn't work. The difference between Apple Chancery and another Chancery, if it's not very far off and the customer says go for it, it's up to you to communicate that with your customer. What I will say is, if I were running a logo for my company and my company used Aachen Bold and you put machine on there instead and it's not quite the same, and I'm seeing an A that doesn't have the same shape as the A in my logo, probably going to ask you about that. That's where it's different. So as with all things, know where you can stretch, know where you can change things. So guys, with that, I think this was a fun topic. It was something that was kind of random. We kind of off the cuff, and maybe it wasn't as technical as these usually are, but I would love for you guys to comment. I would love for you guys to come up with other hacks, tips, tricks, and shortcuts, whether they're real or the ones you shouldn't do. And we can discuss these again. Like I said, the Takeup is here for you. Don't get me wrong. I love doing it. I love being here. I like having this discussion, but it's here for you and it's here for what you need. So anytime I sit down in the Embroidery studios and start working something up for the Takeup and I turn on the lights and get ready, I'm here to make this work for you and to teach you whatever I can and to share things. And I'm going to say thank you all so much for sharing with each other in the comments. But absolutely, come up with things you want to talk about. Come up with topics. Hit them up in the comments here. Catch me online, facebook.com/Erich.Campbell. Catch me on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever I am. That little CH at the end of my name makes me easy to find. And if you ask me questions, I will answer them as best I can, if I can. And if not, you might end up seeing them on the Takeup too as a topic. So catch up with this stuff. Catch it on the replay. Ask questions in the comments. We'd like to catch up with those things later too. But I would love to hear your comments on it. So with that, let's go back over what we had one more time real fast. Talked about shortcuts. What are good shortcuts? Things that actually save you time. Those are real good shortcuts. What are bad shortcuts? Cutting corners that ends up with a lesser product or a lesser execution. Favorite shortcuts I put on here, keyboard shortcuts for your software. Those are the real literal shortcuts that are absolutely useful and I think you should learn. Go learn keyboard shortcuts for your software and go learn how to nudge around your points and objects with the arrow keys. It will save you and allow you to do precision work quickly. Hacks, right? What are hacks? Well, the kind of life hacks we see on 5-minute life hack, whatever videos on YouTube, those hacks are usually not all that useful. They usually present you a version of something that looks like you are going to get out of a lot of labor or get some sort of special effect from something without any sort of help, without any special materials. And pretty often they're kind of disappointing. What's a real hack is to use things in a new way. Like the software I showed you guys. I showed you conversion software. I showed you how to work with vectors in a different way. Use something that you already have in a different way. Take a keyboard font and take lettering and use the lettering as shapes for something else. Take a stock design, rip a piece out of it and replace it with applique instead of a fill. Hack something by taking it apart and putting it back together in a new way. Take two different types of designs. Take a different design style and a piece of art and smash that together and make something new. Those are cool hacks. Those are the hacks that are interesting to us and may save time. Or, hey, like we saw with Mike's thing, take a bungee cord and use it to hold something down. And maybe not be intended for that, but if it works and it doesn't cause any harm, no foul. That's a good hack. But don't be a hack. Don't do bad work in the process of trying to save yourself a buck or save yourself some time. The truth of the matter is people will understand real quality and they will come to it. The last thing, secrets. There are no secrets in the execution of embroidery. This is an art form that's been around a very long time, and even the machine-driven part of it has been around long enough that people generally know how. The price of entry in this world is to be decent enough to put together something where you don't chew up a garment on the machine and then it registers nicely and looks okay. The things that should be beyond it, that are kind of your secrets, are the hand that you bring, the hand of the creator. It is you being able to consult with people and give them good solutions, to come up with ideas that will help them promote themselves or show their pride or do what it is that they want the embroidery to do. That's what goes beyond. It is your creativity to make textural, interesting treatments out of thread and to use thread for its best qualities. Those are the secrets. And even then, we should be sharing these and differentiate from each other by the things that we are, that we do, that we like, that bring the flavor of who we are into our work. So with that, guys, that is another week down. That is another episode of the Takeup, and I can't wait to do it again. I'd love to see more in the comments, and I'd love to hear more from you online, and I can't wait to see you all again next week.